You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. And we are here again with Joe Bonilla, who is the managing partner, senior media director, and co-founder of Relentless Awareness, an Albany-based communications firm that specializes in crisis communication. Joe joined us recently and discussed all of the messages we have been getting from businesses, brands, and organizations, as well as what we can do to support local businesses and nonprofits during this time. With information changing not only daily, but hour by hour, Joe joins us again to share some of the tips for organizations moving forward, what is currently happening in the Albany community to help those in need, and how we can support local businesses. So welcome, Joe.
It's great to be back on with you, Alyssa.
Thanks so much for coming back on. So a lot has happened since you spoke on our show recently. Let's start with the impact of the coronavirus on nonprofits. We've seen fundraisers that were set to happen this spring canceled and are looking at a future New York State budget that will definitely be shaped by this outbreak, all while nonprofits are still trying to actively provide services to their clients and those in need. Based on what we know today, how can nonprofits best prepare for what is to come so that they can still have the funds and support to provide their services?
Well, there's a few uncertain variables that I think we need to figure out right now. Namely, the New York State budget is due by law on April the 1st each year. And generally, March is really the time where organizations, establishments, any sort of interest group is lobbying inside the halls of power here in Albany, inside the Capitol and the Legislative Office building, jostling with members of the Assembly and the Senate and also with the governor's office and trying to get their slice of the pie, if you will. And, of course, because of the COVID-19 situation, that's not happening right now. So I think there's a few different things with that. Number one, if you are an advocacy organization, how do you get your message out there when pretty much the only message that folks are hearing right now is regarding the crisis, right? And so there's ways of still getting things out, still using social media and other platforms, and of course news media and outlets still need other content to go along with, of course, the breaking news of developments happening here in Albany or New York City or in Washington. So there's still an avenue for that, but obviously make sure you're pitching to the right reporter and they have the right beat that they're covering. Secondly, in terms of the funding, I think the funding for all organizations, not just nonprofits, but any organization that's looking for state or federal funding, I think more on the state side this year, there's no precedent for this. I think the closest precedent that we've had in modern time has been the 2008 recession, followed by the 2009 coup. And for those of you who are familiar with Albany politics, that was when the state Senate, two members of the Democratic Conference then went over to caucus with Republicans, switched over power. Who suffered? It was the people of the state of New York. And so that was a situation where there was instability, there was uncertainty, but that was more or less by political design versus a global uncertainty. So I do think there's going to be a huge challenge on the funding side, especially for those who are reliant on state support. As the governor this week has indicated that the state budget's going to have a pretty significant hit due to, of course, what the governor has termed pause, the actions that relate to the pause executive order. In terms of the collection of sales taxes, income taxes, just overall business activity has just been totally shuttered this month. So you're going to start to see the ramifications. Of course, we're at the end of the state fiscal year, and as they're building up for next year's projections, I mean, this is not going to go away in a couple of weeks. It's going to be going on for a couple of months at the bare minimum. So I think what organizations can do for fundraising, there's still other forms of fundraising you can still do. There's still GoFundMe and other things you can do as well in that interim. Of course, you can't hold galas and events as folks would do, or fundraising drives in the same traditional sense. So there's a lot of tools you can use online, using the web, using your own network, to be able to facilitate that development of funding for your organization through private means. Now, we'll see, and I would assume fairly soon, an update on where we are with the state budget. My personal opinion on the matter, I think this will be a late state budget. I don't think there's any way that they can appropriately get it done before the deadline. I don't see it happening, and I think it might be irresponsible for them to rush it, given that a lot of this negotiation that would normally happen has not happened in full earnest. So I would suspect it will be a late budget. And sometimes a late budget is not a bad thing. A late budget can still be a better budget because you've at least have addressed the issues that need to be addressed. So I think it's something for every nonprofit to look at, and pay attention to it in the coming weeks.
Well, thank you for that. And I also have been seeing a lot of your updates that you've been giving, because like we said, with things changing so quickly, the updates are very helpful as, what is coming from the governor's office, what's coming from, the citywide level, and how can we best move forward. So we were talking about non-for-profits and how they offer an array of services to help the community. But a lot of other individuals and businesses have been active in trying to help, especially during this time. Can you talk a little bit about the current initiatives happening, such as Feed Albany, and how individuals can utilize these services, or if they're able to help with these initiatives?
I think there's a number, as Alyssa, as you mentioned, there are initiatives that are going on right now that are being driven by individuals, businesses, other organizations, and we're all collaborating together. It's similar to the old adage, a rising tide lifts all boats. And what we found is that restaurants, local officials, different businesses all want to do their part. And, we've been helpful with two particular initiatives, and we've been supportive of a third. The first is, of course, Feed Albany, as you mentioned, where a few of us together, Jason and Kay Pierce from Savoy Tap Room, Dominic Pernomo from DP and Yonos, Matt Peter, who is an Albany County legislator and also the head of the parking authority, Christine Tate and Danielle McMullen, we've all got together to create this initiative that would utilize these now recently unemployed restaurant and service industry employees to volunteer their talents to help feeding those at risk and in need, in addition to providing meals for those in the restaurant and hospitality industries. And we just launched it just this week in full earnest, where meals are either available for pickup or for delivery. If you come for pickup or delivery, you get 3 meals made by the folks who are volunteering their time in these commercial kitchens. We had the first event at DP. We had the next event at Savoy Tap Room. We also did food deliveries over to the St. Vincent's Food Pantry. And we've been collaborating with the regional food bank to ensure that we have the necessary food to make this happen, just because, even though we're all volunteering, the restaurants that are doing this have also been significantly hit. So, of course, it's that collaboration between the regional food bank and these restaurants, in addition to getting delivery support from the Albany County Sheriff, and a quick shout out to Craig Apple and really helping out right there. The next initiative that we've been working on is Tip Your Bartender. So this is more of a financial incentive for those who have been directly affected. Your bartenders, your servers, your front of house staff, in these establishments where they have helped. If you've gone to a restaurant or a bar or a cafe, and they've served you, this is your opportunity to serve them back. And what has been done is that there's a whole apparatus where you can donate, or if you are somebody in the service industry, you can register for it, and folks can then donate back to you. Now, there is a third initiative.
This is good. The more initiatives, the better.
Called Bartender. Now, it's spelled bar with a hyphen and then parentheses tender. And it's a very simple, it's a Google Doc, it's a Google spreadsheet rather, of a list of capital region bartenders and service staff where, let's say you're having a beverage at home, you're having a meal for takeout, think of that person that would have normally have provided you that beverage, who would have normally provided you that meal, and give them a tip, and think about them. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but every dollar counts. So those are 3 initiatives right then and there. And of course, there are probably untold numbers of initiatives going around, not just the capital region, but all across the country of ways we can support the restaurant and service industry, because that industry, along with the hospitality and tourism, have been the hardest hit because of obviously the efforts we are doing collectively to contain the virus's spread. And so what we all have to do is think of ways we can continue to support this, and think of this as well, is that this is only the first few days of the full pause initiative, the pause order going into place, in addition to just all the changes that every single person in this country and, of course, the world has had to face. So the sustainability of this initiative is the most important thing we can do right now. And, yeah, I mean, basically, when of course we're getting some good coverage for this, and Alyssa, thank you for asking me about this question, but, when the cameras are off and when the folks are not asking about it, we still want to make sure that people still know about this program. I would suspect that beyond this crisis, when things have, resumed a thing called quote unquote normal, that this becomes something. So therefore, if people are laid off, let's say there's a restaurant that by whatever design had to shut down, that there is this program for folks. So therefore, we are lifting people out of just total isolation and uncertainty in terms of where they're going to be able to get a bite to eat and sustain themselves and stay safe.
And like, as you were saying, so small businesses and restaurants and, hospitality is being hit really hard. And at the community level, these are our, the owners and staff are our neighbors, our friends. They are part of our community. So you mentioned some of these initiatives, but is there anything else that we can do to support local business?
I would say continue to order takeout, order delivery. Of course, in a lot of places, doing contact delivery. If that restaurant or cafe has an option to have their staff deliver to you, do that before using a third-party provider. And the reason for that is because that third-party provider, as convenient as it may be, takes out a chunk of that fee, the total order fee. That could be 30%. I know there's been talk of, they're going to waive these fees. It's still not in total because they still have to pay for the apparatus, they still have to pay for the drivers. So if there's an option for you to get contactless delivery done by that restaurant cafe directly, do that first versus using a third-party provider. Of course, pick up. And then, the other part of it too, if you've had a great experience, share it and document you having that good experience, that dining experience, that beverage, whatever it has to be. There are still a handful of local retailers that have met the definition of what an essential business is still right now. Utilize them, and if they have an online component that can still, you can still order through, do that. I think that's the number one thing we're seeing right now is I think we're in a staggered approach in terms of the true impact it is for small businesses of all kinds, not just in hospitality and restaurants and events, but everybody within the ecosystem and supply chain that are reliant on these businesses are all hurting in different ways. Some are smaller, some are harder. And of course, the ways we've all had to pivot because of this situation. And so the number one thing you can do, again, the few things I've already mentioned, you can pick up, you can get things delivered, but just evangelize and support these businesses during this time. And then when things go back to, again, I'm going to use it again, this quote unquote new normal, continue to support these places, because these are the places that employ your neighbors, your family members, your friends. These are the ones that you see day in and day out. These are the ones that when your kid's school needs something like a gift card or whatever for that fundraiser, those are the businesses that are going to step up to the plate. It will not be big business that does it. It's going to be the Main Street businesses that do that. So the more you can do to keep those businesses alive during this very uncertain time, do it now.
Good words of advice. Thank you. And in your last segment, you spoke about all the emails that we've been getting from businesses, brands, and organizations. And last week, those emails were talking about what they were doing to keep us safe. For example, sharing their daily cleaning procedures. So now, as we move forward, will the messaging in those emails change as they hope to re-engage with customers and plan ahead?
Absolutely. I think what we saw in the first week, as I mentioned, many states going into this pause order based upon their own state government, that it was a lot of I'll use this term, informational chaos, because every single day, hour by hour, the guidance was changing, and it was a bit hard for anybody to keep track of exactly what's happening for your state government, your local government, and of course the federal government as well. And so what you're now seeing is that now that some of the dust has settled, that now there is additional guidance, now that more of the focus is on, of course, tracking and testing and treating COVID-19 patients and those who may have tested positive. We're no longer in a situation where we're changing society as much. There will probably be some additional guidance regarding parks and other recreational facilities. Obviously people still need to go outside their house. They just can't be stuffed up inside the house watching Doc McStuffins all day. So what they have to figure out is that little bit of guidance, but that's not really the biggest part of it, I think. So right now, what you will see from brands and companies and organizations will be ways you can still support these organizations and brands and businesses during this time. And as we get a little bit further down the situation, and we begin to turn that faucet back on, that economic faucet back on, those are going to be the time we're going to start to see the messages shift. I think every single organization and business is going to be different in terms of that message being delivered and being conveyed, because the message a beverage supplier might provide is going to be different than a janitorial service, right? One company might be deemed more essential than the other. And so you're going to see these different messages, but I think the one thing across the board that's going to be important is the empathy and the compassion and the care the messaging has to provide, because even though these are entities, these are companies, organizations, businesses, brands, people are still behind each and every one of them, and they're still working and they're on the front lines, to make sure that society continues still and during this pausing of life right now, if you will. And so you'll see those messages change. I think it's important just to make sure that when these organizations are sending out messages, and if you are a communicator, talk about the facts. Do not continue to spread rumors, and make sure that every bit of information is properly vetted and validated, because the worst thing that anyone can do right now is to spread rumor and falsehoods and untruths in a time of uncertainty where there's so many different fears, some of completely accurate and some unfounded. But the worst thing you can do is to spread falsehoods and fears when we are all trying to work through this together. So I think you'll see that messaging start to change as well.
Well, thank you so much for breaking this down for us and for being a kind of a regular guest right now on our show.
A little bit.
Well, it's so much has been changing, and it's so hard to keep up and to know all the ways, all the initiatives that you mentioned that are going on, and what ways we can support our community. And some people I know want to be involved and help out in certain ways, and they're not sure where to go or what's the safest route. So having you come on and sort of break it down for us pretty simply and clearly is very helpful. So again, we've been with Joe Bonilla, who is the managing partner, senior media director, and co-founder of Relentless Awareness. Thank you so much for being on.
Pleasure as always.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.